Welcome to Crushed Husband. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin. The old drafting compass clicked softly in my hand. I didn't need it to tell time anymore, not really. The digital clock on the stove worked just fine, but I trusted it. My grandfather's compass had measured distances and plans across half the barns and churches in Addison County. I used it now to track the hour I rose each morning, 6:30 on the dot, just like always. My name is Harlan Voss. I'm 78 years old, and I live in the same farmhouse I was born in, just outside Middlebury, Vermont. Or at least, I used to live here alone. These days, I tiptoe around my own house like a stranger. Camille and Jared, my daughter and son, and Camille's husband Eli are all still asleep upstairs. It's not unusual for them to stay in bed past 10. They treat the place like an Airbnb with no checkout time. I creaked through the kitchen, careful not to step on the spots I knew would groan. I'd hidden the good eggs and the sharp cheddar behind a sack of potatoes in the bottom drawer of the fridge last night. They go fast otherwise. Camille has no concept of portioning, and Jared eats like the fridge owes him something. I scrambled 2 eggs with a little salt, added a few slices of cheese, and stood at the window while I ate. A fine mist clung to the hills outside, rolling slow over the pasture like it had nowhere to be. I miss that feeling. These days, every moment felt borrowed. Back when I was working, I'd have had 2 hours into a blueprint by now. I was an architect. Real lines, drafting paper, scale models. None of this digital slop. I used to spend hours getting a roof pitch perfect. Now the only thing I arrange is how to stretch a carton of milk for 4 people who don't contribute a dime. After breakfast, I slipped into the workshop. It's the only part of the house that still feels like mine. The door creaked as I opened it, not from age, but from being opened too often lately. I stepped inside and froze. My scale rulers weren't where I'd left them. The lead weight I used for paper curls had been moved. My drafting table had scratches across its surface. Faint, but they weren't from me. Someone had been in here. I stood still, trying to think. Jared had no interest in my tools, but Eli was always asking questions. What was this for? What's that do? How old is this? Too polite by half. Camille said he respected my work, but I didn't buy it. Nobody respects what they can take. I walked over and checked the lockbox under the bench. Still locked. I didn't keep money in there, just the original blueprints from my early years, the ones nobody had seen. I'd built a library in Burlington in '73, a retirement center near the lake in '88. I was proud of that work. I didn't want it bent or handled like junk. The room smelled wrong, like cologne and shoe polish. Eli wore both. I sighed and sat down at the stool, suddenly very tired. In my own house, my own sanctuary, I felt like a trespasser. No one said it out loud, but they didn't see me as the owner anymore. I was just an old man with good credit and a warm furnace. But I wasn't blind. Something was happening. My tools didn't move themselves. The cheese didn't vanish on its own. Camille didn't used to be so cruel, Jared not so sullen. Something had shifted, and now someone had been in my private space. They wanted something, and I had a feeling I knew what. I heard her before I saw her. The thump of slippers on hardwood, the exaggerated sigh as she opened the fridge, then the familiar voice, sharp and already irritated. Did we seriously run out of eggs again? Camille stood in the middle of the kitchen in one of my old flannel shirts, sleeves rolled past her elbows, her hair matted on one side like she'd slept hard and late. I didn't answer right away. I was rinsing out my coffee cup at the sink, trying to keep my tone even. I bought groceries yesterday morning. Well, there's nothing left, she snapped, as if I was the one who'd eaten everything. This place is like a black hole. Things just disappear. She wasn't wrong about that. Food did vanish fast around here, but it sure as hell wasn't me draining the cereal box dry by noon or scraping the peanut butter jar with a spoon at midnight. I leaned back against the counter, drying my hands on a dish towel. I put milk, eggs, bread, and fruit in the fridge. You saw me carry it in. Camille slammed the fridge shut, then opened the pantry like she was hoping something different might have grown in there overnight. "So what? You hiding food now?" she muttered. My pulse kicked up, but I said nothing. "You know," she went on, pulling out a box of stale crackers and checking the back like it might magically list breakfast instructions. "It's getting a little weird how you squirrel stuff away. You live with your family now, Dad. You don't have to hoard like some Depression-era widower." I stared at her. "I'm not hoarding. I'm managing." Camille laughed, dry and hollow. "You mean controlling?" like always. She didn't wait for me to reply. She wandered off into the living room with her crackers and flopped onto the sofa like gravity had hit her harder than the rest of us. I heard the TV flick on, and a second later, some talk show host's voice filled the air, too loud for this early. I stood there in the kitchen, alone again, listening to the same house I grew up in feel like a stranger's. I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask her how we got here, when our conversations became performances instead of exchanges. But I knew how it would go. She'd roll her eyes. She'd call me controlling again. She'd say I never supported her dreams, like quitting work and lounging around here was part of some carefully planned journey. I sat at the table with my second cup of coffee and stared out the window, watching a blue jay twitch on the fence post. My wife, Helen, would have stepped in by now. She was a referee without ever raising her voice, had a way of softening sharp edges with just a glance. But Helen had been gone 10 years, and none of that quiet balance had survived her. Jared clomped down the stairs a little after 9, bleary-eyed and unshaven, his Carhartt jacket slung over one shoulder. Not that he had a job to go to. "You eat already?" he asked, cracking open the fridge. I nodded. "Jesus," he muttered, staring inside. "No eggs, no bacon. You buy anything at all?" "I bought a full load yesterday," I said, trying to keep calm. He slammed the fridge and turned around, jaw set, like I'd accused him of something. "What, you hiding it again? Camille said you're stashing groceries like it's gold bullion." I stood up, rinsed my cup, and placed it in the drying rack. "If I don't, there's nothing left when I need it." Jared scoffed, reached into the cupboard, and pulled out a sleeve of saltines. "Real cozy, Dad. Real generous." He dropped onto the other end of the couch beside Camille and shoved a handful into his mouth. The volume on the TV went up another notch. I walked down the hall toward my workshop, my hands clenched behind my back. I could feel it again. That sensation like I was just renting space in my own life. They treated me like the lodger, like the inconvenient roommate who paid the bills and spoke too little. Behind me, their voices mixed with the TV and the crunch of dry crackers. And for the second morning in a row, I missed Helen so bad it felt like drowning. Once the house emptied out around noon, Camille off to whatever she calls errands, Jared headed into town without explanation, and Eli supposedly meeting a client. I finally had a few hours of quiet, the kind of quiet that used to mean peace. Lately, it just meant opportunity. I locked the front door, slid the bolt, and moved through the hall toward my study. The room hadn't changed in decades. Same built-in oak shelves, same wool rug Helen picked out in '92. The smell of pencil shavings and old paper always lingered, but when I stepped inside this time, the air felt wrong. Not just disturbed, violated. The desk drawer didn't catch like it usually did. I pulled it open slowly. The folders inside were jumbled, out of sequence. I always kept them alphabetical, neatly labeled in my own hand. Now the L's were stuck between the B's, and one envelope was completely empty, just the flap hanging open like a yawning mouth. I reached for the small, lockable box in the bottom drawer. The key still sat under the globe, where I always kept it. I unlocked it and flipped through the contents. Receipts, birth certificates, my power of attorney form. One page was bent at the corner. Another had a fingerprint smudge along the top edge. Not mine. My stomach turned. I checked the side compartment where I kept emergency cash. Just under 1,000, last I'd counted. I reached in and knew right away. Lighter. I counted slowly. 300 left, 700 gone. I leaned back, heart ticking against my ribs. I'd chalked things up to forgetfulness more than once over the past year. A misplaced key. A watch I hadn't seen since Christmas. A small box of Helen's earrings that I was sure I'd stashed in the linen closet vanished. I thought maybe I was slipping. But no, I wasn't. I looked around the room, feeling the temperature shift. Not in the air, but under my skin. Someone had been going through my life, behind my back, while pretending to need me. I relocked the box, returned everything to place as best I could, and sat in the armchair by the window for a long time. That night, Eli came back before the others. Polished loafers, the smell of cologne stronger than usual. "Evening, Harland," he said, his smile smooth as butter left on the counter too long. "House is all yours today?" I nodded. "Must be nice," he added, peering around like he owned stock in the drywall. I was thinking, with everything getting harder these days, bills, upkeep. You ever consider making things easier on yourself? I tilted my head. I mean, selling the place, he said, laughing softly. Or downsizing, moving into something less burdensome. You'd still have plenty to live on and peace of mind, that kind of thing. There it was. I stared at him, saying nothing. He kept his smile on, but I saw the flicker behind it. Calculation. You know, he added, Camille and I would be happy to help when the time comes. I nodded once and turned away, pretending I hadn't heard, but I had. They were circling, planning something. And now I knew for sure. They'd already started. The article caught my eye while I was sipping coffee on the back porch. Paper unfolded on the table beside my plate. Vermont utilities set to raise rates this winter. I read it twice, not because the news was surprising, but because something didn't sit right. Camille had asked for money last month. Something about the heating bill being overdue, and how the company was going to charge a late fee if she didn't pay immediately. I remember handing her $200 in cash. She said she'd take care of it, just like she said the month before, and the month before that. I finished my coffee, folded the paper neatly, and went inside to check the drawer by the phone. That's where I kept the old invoices, utility bills, property tax stubs, furnace service logs. Or at least, I used to. The drawer was nearly empty. No envelopes, no receipts. Just a dusty stapler and a pad of paper with my name printed across the top. A gift from Helen for our anniversary years ago. I flipped through it absently, then stopped, walked to the landline, and dialed the electric company. Hi, I'm calling about the service at 2297 County Road. This is Harlan Voss. I'd like to confirm the billing status. There was a short pause, then some typing. Mr. Voss, looks like the account is currently past due by 3 months, the woman said, polite but blunt. 3 months. And the billing contact on file, I asked. She hesitated. Camille Voss. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the chair by the desk for a minute. My hands were steady, but my stomach had gone cold. I tried the phone company next. Same answer, overdue. Then the oil supplier, the same family-run outfit we'd used for 30 years. The man on the phone was kind, embarrassed even. Harland, he said. I hated to keep sending the notices, but I didn't want to just cut you off. How far behind? I asked. About 900. I'm real sorry. I thought you knew. I thanked him and hung up. My wallet sat on the side table. I opened it slowly, then pulled out my bank card. Something had been itching at me for weeks, a vague discomfort I hadn't been able to name. I drove to the bank. The teller was young, cheerful, called me Mr. Voss, and asked how I was doing. I told her I wanted to review recent withdrawals. In person. She printed a list. My pension came in on the 2nd of every month, just like clockwork. On the 1st of every month, then one day before, there was a $500 ATM withdrawal. Same amount. Same machine. 10 straight months. Did I make those? I asked, even though I already knew. She checked the records. Used your card and PIN, she said. Do you need to dispute them? No, I said. Not yet. I left the bank in silence, my mind buzzing louder than the cicadas in the trees. I hadn't told anyone my PIN, except Jared. 6 months ago, I gave him the card once. I had a doctor's appointment in Burlington and forgot my wallet. I wrote the code on a napkin and told him to grab a prescription for me while I waited in the car. I remembered him grinning, saying, You know, Dad, this stuff's getting complicated. You ought to keep things simpler. I thought he meant well. Back at home, Camille was in the kitchen opening a bottle of ginger ale. She barely looked up. Hey, did you see we're out of trash bags again? Jared said you bought some. I just stared at her for a moment. I did, I said, but I guess they disappeared. She made a face like I was being difficult. Okay, well, I'll just grab more tomorrow. Don't stress. I walked past her without a word, up the stairs, into my room, and I locked the door behind me. First time in years. They weren't just careless. They were bleeding me, and they thought I wouldn't notice. Jared had left in a hurry that morning, said something about needing to meet a guy about work, but he hadn't worked a real job in over a year. Camille and Eli had already packed for the weekend. A couple's retreat up near Stowe, though judging by Camille's suitcase and Eli's blazer, it looked more like a wine and dine getaway than anything therapeutic. The moment the door shut behind them, I locked it, then double-checked every window. I wasn't afraid. I was preparing. I moved quickly like I used to on site when something in the blueprint didn't line up, and I needed to find the error before the concrete was poured. First stop was Jared's room, the one that still smelled faintly of stale beer and burnt toast. I opened his closet, which was surprisingly neat, and knelt beside a cracked Rubbermaid bin wedged behind a pair of old boots. Inside, among layers of wrinkled t-shirts and dusty contractor forms, I found what I was looking for: a black folder. Thin, stiff, unmarked. I opened it carefully. Foreign transfer slips, wire confirmations, printouts from an offshore banking service. Not local banks, but one based out of Panama. One page caught my eye. A ledger listing deposits over the past 10 months. Dates, amounts, most of them in increments of $500. My stomach churned. Jared hadn't just skimmed my pension. He'd been funneling it overseas. I didn't know what for. Maybe he was saving for an escape. Maybe he owed someone. Maybe he just thought I'd never notice because I still wore slippers to check the mail. I kept going. Tucked into the back corner of the closet, behind a broken-down shelving unit, was a taped-up cardboard box. I dragged it out, heart pounding as I peeled the tape. The first thing I saw was a velvet pouch, the one Helen used to keep her jewelry in. Inside it, her silver locket, the one she wore every Sunday. The matching earrings were gone, but the locket was there, cold in my palm. Beneath that, bubble-wrapped bundles, my old drafting compass set, one from college, the engraved protractor my mentor gave me when I passed my boards, even my earliest scale models, the museum wing I designed in '77, the chapel in Brattleboro, stolen, stored like trash. I sat back on my heels and stared at the mess, hands trembling, pulse drumming in my ears. I didn't know if Jared had planned to sell it all, or if this was some twisted keepsake bin. But it didn't matter. He'd taken it. They'd all taken something. I repacked the box neatly, left it on my bed. Later that night, I was in the hallway when I heard the front door open. Camille and Eli were laughing, tipsy and loud, shoes clicking against the floor. And then the concierge brought out the bottle, and Eli goes, "Actually, do you have the 96 instead?" Camille giggled. "That's the trick," Eli said, smug. "Act like you're already rich, and they treat you like you are." They stumbled into the kitchen. I waited quietly in the hallway shadows, just out of view, listening. "Did you talk to Jared?" Eli asked. "He's on board," Camille said, voice lower now. "He said he'll help with the paperwork, but we need a doctor to sign off." "Already working on it," Eli replied. "We just need something saying Dad's confused, unsafe on his own." There was a pause. A wine bottle popped. "Once he's in a facility," Camille added, "we can sell the house, quietly. No probate issues if we get it in writing first." "And the lawyer?" "Jared said we don't need one yet. Just keep him calm. Make him feel included." My body felt like it had turned to stone. They weren't just bleeding me. They were preparing to erase me, and I was done waiting. The bank was quiet when I arrived. Mid-morning on a Thursday. The kind of hour that used to belong to retirees and working parents on errands. I walked in with my folder tucked under one arm, nodded politely to the young man at the front desk, and waited as he fetched the branch manager. I'd been with that bank for over 40 years. I remembered when they still stamped passbooks and gave out calendars with covered bridges on them. But I also knew loyalty didn't protect you, not from your own kin, not from access granted without scrutiny. The manager, Cheryl, was kind but clearly nervous. I didn't waste time. "I want my current account closed today. Every dollar moved to a new checking account in my name only. No joint access, no automatic transfers, no linked cards." She blinked. "Of course, Mr. Voss. Would you like to explain the reason?" "No." She nodded. Within half an hour, it was done. I left the branch with a fresh stack of paperwork and a new debit card sealed in a white envelope. It felt like putting on a new pair of boots after walking in wet ones too long. From there, I drove straight to Farnham and Kay. Their office sat above a law firm in a brick building in downtown Middlebury, wedged between the coffee shop and a dental practice. I'd made the appointment quietly, called from the library 3 towns over. Trust at this point was not something I handed out freely. Grant Kay looked young, maybe mid-30s, but he had sharp eyes and a quiet, measured way of speaking that reminded me of myself at that age, before the noise of family dulled the precision. His desk was neat, his office lined with books and clean white folders. I told him everything, not all at once, not dramatically. Just fact by fact, like laying out floor plans, the missing money, the forged withdrawals, the stolen jewelry, the overheard conversation about declaring me incompetent, the house, the lies, the betrayal. Grant never interrupted. When I was finished, he sat back, tapped his pen once on the desk, then said, "We're not just talking about elder neglect. You're describing a coordinated financial and property scheme. The good news is, we can act." I exhaled. He leaned forward. "As first, we'll update your will. Take them out completely. No ambiguity. Next, we draft a transfer on death clause to a charitable foundation of your choosing. Keeps it airtight. Third, and this is the part that tends to shake people, we file eviction notices. You'll need to be ready for a fight." "I've lived through worse," I said. He smiled faintly. We talked through timelines, enforcement, who would serve the papers and when. He asked if I had somewhere else to go in the meantime. I told him I wasn't going anywhere. This was my house. They were the ones who didn't belong. That night, I sat in my workshop, surrounded by rulers and lead weights and the ticking silence I used to think was loneliness. I pulled out Helen's old folder, the one labeled Vermont Design Trust, Scholarship Drafts. She'd kept it from her teaching days. Inside were the outlines for a fund we'd never gotten around to establishing, to help rural students study architecture and design. I'd found the name years ago, circled in blue ink on a sticky note in her handwriting. A home is something you build. I remembered reading it the first time. I remembered why she wrote it. I called Grant the next morning. "I want to leave it to them," I said. "The house, the property, everything, on one condition." "Which is?" "That they use it for what it was meant for. Design education. Helen would have liked that." He was quiet a moment. "We'll make it stick." 3 days later, the eviction notices were filed. 4 days after that, they were served. 1 each, hand-delivered. Jared cussed out the process server on the porch. Camille screamed and slammed the door. Eli didn't say a word. He just stared at me from the front lawn like a man who'd finally realized the foundation was crumbling beneath him, and the architect had redrawn the blueprints without telling anyone. They gathered in the kitchen the next evening like nothing had changed. Jared nursing a beer near the sink. Camille pacing with her arms crossed. Eli leaning against the island like he owned the countertop. The air was thick with tension, but no one spoke until I set the manila envelope on the table. "What's that supposed to be?" Camille asked, eyeing it like it might explode. "You already know what it is," I said quietly. "Eviction papers. Legal and final." Jared let out a scoffing laugh. "You've got to be kidding me. You think you can just throw us out?" Camille snapped, her voice already rising. "After everything?" "After everything," I repeated. "Yes, exactly after everything." "You've lost it," Jared muttered, shaking his head. "This is paranoid nonsense. You think we're robbing you? You've always been dramatic, but this... You've been stealing from me for almost a year," I interrupted. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through them like a gust of cold wind. "You used my PIN. You funneled my pension to a foreign bank account. Don't deny it. I've seen the ledger." Jared froze, the color draining from his face. Camille's eyes darted toward him, her mouth slightly open. But she said nothing. I turned to her. "You took money to pay the bills and didn't pay them. Let utilities go delinquent while you sat here watching TV all day. You lied. And you let your husband..." I looked at Eli, who hadn't moved, rifle through my documents and ask about my future plans like he was scouting for my obituary. Eli's jaw clenched. "You're confused. We were just concerned. You've been... forgetful. We were trying to help." I stepped forward. Don't insult me any more than you already have." "You've always been like this," Camille hissed. "Cold, distant, controlling. You never hugged us. You never told us you were proud of us. You never gave me a reason to be," I said. "But I still gave you everything else. My home, my income, my trust." "And now what?" Jared asked bitterly. "You're gonna kick us out and die alone in this creaky old house? You think some charity's gonna love you more than your own family?" I looked at them each in turn. "I'm selling the house," I said, flat and final. "It's already in motion. And every cent is going to a foundation, a design education fund in your mother's name. Not a dime is going to either of you." Silence. Then Camille let out a breath that sounded more like a sob. "You can't do that. This is our family home. You'd really give it all to strangers?" "They won't be strangers for long," I said. "They'll be students, kids who want to build, who still believe in earning things. "You're a bitter old man," Jared spat. "And you're a grown man who stole from your father," I answered calmly. Eli slammed his palm on the counter. "You're destroying your family, Harland." "No," I said. "You did that." "I'm just finally acknowledging it." Camille turned away and buried her face in her hands. "You're punishing us for not being perfect, for not being mom." That stopped me. "You think I don't know that?" I said, quieter now. "You think I don't know I failed somewhere along the way? But I built this house with her. I trusted you all with it. And now you're trying to bury me alive in it, so you can cash it in." "Dad," Jared said, trying a softer tone. "Let's be reasonable. We've all made mistakes." "No," I cut in. "Mistakes are forgetting a birthday. What you did was a plan, a scheme, and I'm done being the mark." Camille's shoulders shook with tears now. Jared stood silently. Eli stared at the eviction notice like he was calculating his next move. "You have 30 days, I said. "Get out, or I'll have the sheriff help you along." I walked to the door, opened it, and turned back one last time. "I loved your mother. She balanced all of this. She believed in kindness, but she also believed in consequences." The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in years, the house felt like mine again. The house felt different the next morning. Not quieter. It had always been too loud, or too full, or too tense. No, this was something else. This was absence. Camille and Eli were gone by noon that Sunday. They didn't say goodbye. I heard them clattering through the hallway, dragging suitcases, Eli cursing about having to carry Camille's boxes without his back brace. Then the door slammed hard enough to rattle the frame. Tires crunched on gravel. Gone. I watched from the upstairs window, not because I needed to see them leave. I just wanted to make sure they didn't take anything else on the way out. Jared stayed. He lingered. At first I thought he was going to fight it, maybe try to sweet-talk me into reconsidering, but he didn't. He just started staying out later, drinking earlier, shuffling through the house like a ghost in unlaced boots. One morning, I found him in the garage, standing beside the crate of heirlooms like he'd forgotten what was inside. He looked up, eyes bleary. "Just looking for the socket wrench," he mumbled. I didn't answer. A few nights later, he made a weak attempt. I was drinking tea in the living room, lamp glowing beside me, when he hovered near the stairs. "Listen," he said. "I know things got screwed up." I kept my eyes on the paper. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Still, I didn't speak. He waited a few seconds, then exhaled, like he'd done his duty and could now retreat with dignity. But there was no dignity in the way he trudged back to the basement. On day 28, I came home from town to find his truck gone, and his room empty except for a single duffel bag on the floor. No note, no explanation. On day 30, he was gone. No ceremony, no apology. I walked through the house that night with the lights off, listening to the creak of the stairs and the wind nudging the shutters. Every room echoed, every drawer stayed closed. It was the first time in years I hadn't heard the TV before bed. I sat down at the kitchen table, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at the chair across from me. It had taken a lifetime to get here, a house full of people, and yet none of them had been family in any real sense of the word. Not in years, just dependents, occupants, leeches with last names that matched mine. I thought I'd feel free. Instead, I just felt still. Not sad, not proud, not angry anymore, just still. And in that stillness, I finally understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. I'd spent decades trying to buy peace. Turns out peace is something you earn, once you stop begging for love from people who only take. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt open. A week after Jared left, I finalized the sale, technically a transfer, of the property. I'd worked out a special clause with Grant K. The deed now belonged to the Helen Voss Design Foundation, but I retained full life residency rights. No one could touch this place while I was still breathing, and when I wasn't, it would become something else entirely. A campus, a learning space, a resource, not a showroom or an inheritance, something useful. I slept better after signing those papers than I had in years. Jared's old room was cleared out the next morning. I opened the windows, rolled up the rug, and scrubbed the floors myself. That room had always been cramped and stale. Something about how he lived in it, as though it were temporary. But once the junk was gone, I realized it faced east. The light poured in over the hilltops like honey around 8 in the morning. I moved my drafting desk in first, then my compass cases, my scale rulers, the blueprints I'd rescued from the garage. I sorted them one by one, some brittle with age, some still crisp and clean, and lined them across the new shelving I'd installed with my own hands. No help, no noise, no backtalk. The tools of my life were finally back in reach. I wasn't designing buildings anymore, but I could still draw, I could still measure, I could still see a space and shape it with intent. One afternoon, while polishing the brass on my grandfather's 19th century compass, I heard a knock at the back door. Not the front, the back. A subtle choice, and I appreciated it. I opened it to find a man about my age, tall, wiry, white beard trimmed to a clean line. He wore a flannel shirt tucked into pressed jeans and held a small tin of loose-leaf tea like a calling card. "Simon Madsen," he said with a quiet smile. "Just moved into the carpenter place down the road." I nodded, gestured him in. "Harlan Voss." "I know," he said, not boastful. "Everyone at the town office is still talking about the foundation deal. Thought I'd stop by and say thank you. I taught public school history for 30 years. Good to see someone leave a footprint that matters." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one that had hosted too many passive-aggressive dinners, and shared the tea. He brought cinnamon biscuits, dry but satisfying. We talked about architecture, Vermont winters, and what it felt like to outlive the expectations of other people. He had 2 daughters, both estranged. He didn't explain why. I didn't ask. At some point, I walked him through the new workshop. He ran his fingers lightly over the walnut surface of my drafting bench. "You ever think about teaching again?" he asked. "Not until now," I said. That night, I stood by the upstairs window and looked out over the same hill I'd stared at for 50 years. The pasture was overgrown. The barn roof needed patching. The maple trees would be bare within a month. But something had changed. This wasn't a tomb anymore. It wasn't a prison. It was a place being repurposed. And for the first time since Helen died, I felt like I was too. The air smelled like wood glue and graphite. The Helen Voss Design Foundation had taken up residence in a converted mill building just outside Montpellier. Red brick, broad windows, and a wide-open interior now filled with drafting tables, student-built models, and the hum of laser cutters. I stood at the back of the room, hands behind my back, watching the next generation do what I used to do, only now with better tools and less hesitation. A girl no older than 16 sat hunched over her sketch pad, frowning as she adjusted the slope of a roofline. Her friend beside her laughed, pointed, and made a joke about engineers never understanding real scale. It was the kind of bickering that came from passion, not obligation. A young teacher, hair in a messy bun, sleeves rolled to the elbows, came up beside me. "They don't know who you are yet," she said. "They just think you're some nice older man watching from the back." "Let's keep it that way," I said. She grinned. "You sure you don't want to teach the Saturday session? We're short one volunteer for the model building class." I thought about it, and then I said, "Yeah, I think I will." That weekend, I stood before 8 teenagers in a room filled with foam core, dull blades, and enough coffee to fuel a semester. I taught them how to hold a compass properly, how to score foam board without tearing it, how to look at an open space and imagine what could rise from it. I didn't mention my children. I didn't need to. They had tried to sell off the bones of this house. These kids, they were learning to build from scratch. Back home, the house was quiet again, but never cold. Not anymore. I'd converted Camille's old room into a reading space, filled it with design books Helen used to keep in her faculty office. The dining room stayed empty unless Simon dropped by, which he often did, bringing blueberry muffins wrapped in napkins and half-finished stories about old railroads or Civil War letters. And then there was Milo, a quiet greyhound from a rescue outside Rutland. He'd been passed over 3 times. Too old, too anxious, too slow. I saw myself in that dog the moment he curled up at the edge of the adoption center and didn't even bother looking up. He followed me through the house like he belonged to it, slept by my drafting bench, watched the squirrels through the screen door, never barked unless a fox crossed too close to the porch. We were 2 old strays who had finally figured out how to be at peace. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the hills, Simon and I sat out on the porch, 2 wooden chairs, a pitcher of sweet tea between us. Milo stretched out under my legs, his chest rising and falling like a metronome. "You ever miss the noise?" Simon asked. I didn't answer right away. "Not the people," he added quickly. "The commotion, the chaos of family." "I don't miss what they gave me," I said. "I miss what I thought it meant." He nodded. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the cicadas start up in the hedges. When he finally spoke again, his voice was soft. "You did something rare, you know. You rewrote your ending." I reached for my glass, let the ice clink against the rim. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I just stopped letting someone else write it for me." He raised his glass. "To that!" We clinked glasses, and in the fading light, with Milo resting easy at my feet and the hills rolling out like old parchment, I understood the truth Helen had known all along, that beginnings don't always come at the start of things. Sometimes they begin right where you choose to stop pretending the old story still fits.